This is part two of our discussion on the West African migration to the east via the ancient Libyans. We went over in our last video how Herodotus and his map, according to that map, everything west of the Nile was considered Libya. So when you consider that, along with what we call Atlantis, it was also pictured on this map. We know that Atlas was a mythological being, so they say, and Atlas was said to have been an astronomer and was accredited for mastering the sphere of the globe. So this science came from West Africa, according to the legend. We also talked about the Tuareg, who are a West African group. They're Berber-speaking group. And if you dig into their language, it'll take you back to the word Tamahu. Tamahu is the ancient Egyptian word, for Libyans. If you go into, the Libyan, this history of these people and the Green Sahara, you have everything from Ma'at, from Amen, from a lot of the deities and customs that we see in Kemet that became Kemetic culture was found in the Sahara first. But it's not just Berber groups that were in this region. With the deterioration of Lake Chad and the Bantu migration, you have groups like the Zulu, my ancestors, the Tonga, groups like the Venda, the Shona. All of these groups had legacies in the East. So, if these people were in the East, how do you explain them being connected to Niger-Congo speaking people? It doesn't really make sense. Niger-Congo accounts for 70 to 85% of the Bantu speaking people. And I just find that kind of interesting. But we'll be getting more into the ancient Libyan, so to speak. So when I say ancient Libyan, don't think that I'm just talking about the Berbers. According to Professor James Breasted, the word Berber itself can even be found in Kemet as Bubastist, and the goddess Best, the goddess Isis and Osar can all be found, in the Sahara amongst these people. The ancient old fight between the agriculturalist and the pastoralist is also told between the Libyan and the so-called Kemetic groups. I've always thought that the pastoralist, agriculturalist beef was between the Asian and the Kemetic peoples, but it would make sense that they would fight amongst the people who were surrounding them and their vicinity way before they would in the outside group. So these groups had a rivalry. These Berber groups would control more of the territory closer to the Mediterranean, of course, while the more Cushitic groups would be down in the southern region of what they call Upper Egypt. But you can even see the Berber culture and customs, folklore, even in Europe. When you're talking about the Tridon and the Neat, Zeus Amen. All of these gods and goddesses came out of the Berber, out of the Sahara. So a lot of things we have to kind of look a little deeper into when it comes to even the cultivation of Europe and who was behind it. That was the website. I would love for you guys to kind of check it out, and I'd love to see more people dig into this. But as you can see, people who write history are going to write it to favor themselves, and our ancestors in Kemet were no exception. So it's kind of rough on the Berbers, but it is what it is. They make a compelling argument that Lower Egypt, Lower Kemet, which I believe is closer to the Mediterranean, was Berber territory. And these people also fought against Europeans and Asiatics coming down into what is called, Kemet, Egypt. We group these people into one group, but we have different Berber peoples and different dialects. So it's not just one people we're talking about. So the overall Libyans are even a wider group, I'm suspecting. A friend of mine, after tracking out genetics, used to always say that his genes traveled out of Africa and came back in. Well, the Berbers have been doing that since the beginning of the time, basically. He may have some ancestry in the Berber. According to scholars, these Libyan Berbers weren't invaders, but natives to the lower Kemet. So this made them, fight to protect it, even against the Nubians who felt they had to unify this land. Now when we start looking at this mythological land of Atlantis, it kind of makes a little sense. I don't know, so, I leave that up to you guys to make that decision. I know one thing. One of my dear teachers, Mama Zobe, she used to always say, in her book about the Sibyls and Mami Wata, she would talk about these Libyans who, so much of their culture ended up in Europe. With these goddesses and these, Venus statuettes. Well, it starts to make sense when you add the Libyan Berbers to the equation. It's kind of crazy, but she talked about sacerdotal power and the importance of being in control of, whose God was who, what God was more powerful. You had certain deities taking over the roles of other deities. Even when it comes to the male and female deities and the sorcery, good magic and bad magic. She went into the Libyan Amazons and the Trojan War, and now Mama's just, I've been looking for her in the last year and a half, 2 years now. I just can't find her, but man, she's incredible. You should go check out all of her material. Actually, she's a brilliant scholar. According to the ancient map of Herodotus, Atlantis was in Mauritania, northwest Africa. Being that everything west of the Nile was considered, Libya, I guess it would be considered ancient Libya. You have Atlantis, and then you have the Atlantic-speaking people. I think it's kind of crazy, kind of funny, groups like the Fuller, the Timni, the Kizzy. These are Atlantic speaking groups. So is that a coincidence? I don't know. You have that Atlas. Atlas was the ruler of Atlantis, but Atlas was also the first ruler of the the modern Mauritania. He was the first ruler. This is where we get the Atlas Mountains from. Whether that's all a coincidence, I don't know. But as you can see, a lot of the Libyan culture ended up in Europe. You have the Poseidon. Poseidon was Atlas's father. And these are all fictitious, so-called fictitious characters, but they ended up in Europe, and they were worshipped and admonished down in Africa, before Europe. So we have to put a lot of this stuff in perspective when we're talking about history. No people can be in proximity with one another and go to war and love, war and peace times, and not become one people and not become, the same people with the same interests at some point. Of course, things change at given times, but I mean, it is what it is. These are how states and kingdoms are formed. The Arabs to this day still call the Nubian Berber groups Berber. We like to say that it's from the root word of barbaric, but you can also find this word in Kemet long before the Europeans got to it. A lot of these Arabs in these regions today are basically, Arabized Berbers. You know what I mean? When the Arabs came in and they took over these territories, they absorbed a lot of these Berber groups that were in the area. Excuse me. When you really start to look at these Berber groups, you see that they have a lot of connection with Sub-Saharan and even West Africa. So long before this rivalry with, the Hyksos, the Europeans, the Phoenicians, the Arabs, we have this rivalry between, brothers right here on the continent, the Libyan and the the Kemetic, or the Nubian, or the Libyan, whatever way you want to kind of look at it. But it's quite clear that for thousands of years, these people fed off each other, intermarried, fought, and were, one kingdom at certain points. But I really think we need to really dig into our West African history and really, kind of go in and see where all of this fits in.